Նախքան իմ գրավոր ելույթը ուզեմ ցեզ դերակացնել, որ մեկ ժամ առաջ նախագահ Օբաման հայտարարությունը կատարեց, որը դժբախտաբար անգամը եւս ցեղասպանություն բառը չկործածեր, բայց կործածե հայերեն լեզվով մեծ եղեն բառը։ Մեծապես հուսախաբ ենք, որ նախագահ Օբաման կշարունակի նույն վախկոտ մոտեցումը թրքական սպառնալիքներու եւ ճնշումի տակ եւ անգամը եւս աշխարհի արժեվ ինքն է որ սլախոս դուրս կգա։ Մեր թադը անփոփոխ կմնա։ Իսկ խնդրած է անդերեն փոքր խոսիմ կներեք օտարյուրը համար։ I just announced in Armenian that President Obama, 1 hour ago, issued a statement on it today in which he failed to use the word genocide, which he had repeatedly pledged during the campaign as senator. He used the Armenian word meziagern, which is disappointing, but it's a clever ploy on his part, just like some of the other presidents before him also used many other euphemisms and word gymnastics. Let me now, thank you. I understand your frustration and anger and disappointment. I join you. I would like to discuss today why Armenians must seek justice and not just recognition for the genocide. The descendants of the survivors of the Armenian genocide tried for decades to crack the wall of silence surrounding the greatest tragedy that befell their nation. Tens of thousands of Armenians throughout the world held protest marches, wrote letters to government officials, and petitioned international organizations. The Turkish government, along with the rest of the world, initially turned a deaf ear to Armenian pleas. But as media outlets, parliaments of various countries, and international organizations began acknowledging the Armenian genocide, Turkish leaders, astonished that the crimes perpetrated by their forefathers were still making headlines so many decades after the fact, began committing major resources behind their hopeless campaign of denial, funding scholars to distort the historical fact, engaging the services of powerful American lobbying firms, and applying political and economic pressure on countries acknowledging the genocide. Since 1965, the legislatures of more than 2 dozen countries have recognized the Armenian genocide. The U.S. House of Representatives in 1975 and again in 1984 adopted resolutions calling it a genocide. President Ronald Reagan issued a presidential proclamation in 1981 that referred to the Armenian genocide. 42 U.S. states out of 50 have also recognized the Armenian genocide. The UN Subcommission on Human Rights reported in 1985 that the Armenian genocide met all of the UN criteria for genocide. The European Parliament acknowledged it in 1987 as genocide. In addition, hundreds of Holocaust and genocide scholars have issued statements confirming the facts of the Armenian genocide. After so many acknowledgments, Armenians must not go beyond genocide recognition. In recent years, we have gradually shifted to seeking justice. Armenian lawyers have filed lawsuits in U.S. federal courts and obtained millions of dollars from New York Life and AXA insurance companies for unpaid claims of policyholders who perished in the genocide. Several other lawsuits are pending against other insurance companies and German banks to recover funds belonging to victims of the Armenian genocide. In 1915, an attempt was made to destroy an entire nation in its ancestral homeland, depriving the survivors of their cultural heritage, as well as their homes, lands, houses of worship, and personal properties. A gross injustice was perpetrated against Armenians, which entitles them to demand compensation for their enormous losses. Restitution can take many forms. In the absence of any voluntary compensation by Turkey, the only remaining recourse is litigation to remove the consequences of the massive crime committed against the Armenian people. A simple apology or acknowledgement of the crime would not do. That would not heal the wounds of the past. Justice must be done in terms of returning the confiscated lands and properties to their rightful owners. In considering legal recourse, we should be mindful of the fact that the Armenian genocide did not start in 1915 and did not end in 1915. Genocidal acts were committed against Armenians, beginning with Sultan Abdul Hamid, massacre of 300,000 Armenians from 1894 to 1896, followed by the killings of 30,000 Armenians in Adana by the Young Turk regime in 1909, and this year is the 100th anniversary of the Adana massacre, culminating in the genocide of 1.5 million Armenians from 1915 to 1923, followed by forced Turkification or outright deportation of tens of thousands of Armenians by the Republic of Turkey. Many of the early leaders of the Turkish Republic were high-ranking Ottoman officials who had participated in the Armenian genocide. This unbroken transition in leadership assured the continuity of the Ottomans' anti-Armenian policies. The Republic of Turkey, as a continuation of the Ottoman Empire, should therefore be held responsible for the genocide. An important document recently found in the U.S. archives provides irrefutable evidence that the Turkish Republic continued to uproot and deport the remnants of Armenians well into the 1930s for purely racial reasons. In the 1920s and 1930s, thousands of Armenian survivors of the genocide were forced out of their homes in Western Armenia. Such racist policies were pursued again in the 1940s under the law of vergi-vergisi, the imposition of exorbitant wealth taxes on Armenians, Greeks, and Jews. And again in 1955, in the 1955 Istanbul pogroms, when many Greeks, Armenians, and Jews were killed and their properties confiscated. This continuum of massacres, genocide, and deportation highlights the existence of a long-term strategy implemented by successive Turkish regimes from 1890s to more recent times in order to solve the Armenian question once and for all. Consequently, the Republic of Armenia is legally liable for its own crimes against Armenians, as well as those committed by its Ottoman predecessors. Armenians have been proclaiming for decades that they have three demands. First, recognition of the genocide. Second, reparations for their losses. Third, return of their territories. Over the years, Armenians have spoken about these three demands so often that even Turkish leaders have learned them by heart and repeat them in their own declarations. Most Armenians and Turks by now have the same misconstrued view of the true nature of the Armenian cause. Both sides mistakenly believe that once the genocide is recognized by Turkey, Armenians can only then make legal demands for reparations and land. This is the main reason why Turkish leaders so adamantly refuse to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. They fear that acceptance of the genocide would lead to demands for restitution. Knowing full well the sequence of the three Armenian demands, Turkey refuses to recognize the genocide, thus cleverly preempting the next two demands. Armenians should not fall into the Turkish trap of getting stuck on the first demand, recognition, which has been mostly accomplished. But even if there were no recognition, Armenians should immediately pursue their demands for restitution through the courts, after consulting international law experts. There is no prerequisite that Turkey first acknowledge the genocide before Armenians could take legal action. Armenians should present their demands to appropriate national and international courts